Tim Corpus, welcome to Cultural Attache.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about the Ear Taxi Festival, which I didn't know anything about before arriving in Chicago. So, can you give our viewers just a brief overview of what Ear Taxi Festival is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ear Taxi Festival is the largest contemporary classical, contemporary concert music festival in the Midwest. It's happening throughout the month of October, so from October 3rd through November 2nd, all across the city of Chicago. So, we have something like 720 some artists involved, 60 plus hours of programming from small performances, jam sessions, larger performances, operas, professional development. It really runs the gamut to include as many musicians from the kind of cultural sector of art music, concert music as possible, because there are already festivals for jazz music and jazz musicians. Chicago's got a great history with that. So we wanted to provide something that's really specific for the classical music community.
Now, this is not a long festival with a long history. The first festival was in 2016. The second festival was in 2021, having been delayed a year by COVID. And then you obviously have this one. So you're sort of on an every 4 year trajectory. It's like you're doing an Olympics arts festival.
Yes, I like
So
to say that as well. It's the Olympics of classical music.
right. So when you're doing an intermittent festival instead of a regular one, I assume there are unique challenges of assembling the talent, the venues, the commissions, everything that goes into that. So what are the biggest challenges for this year's festival, which I believe has the theme of the composer's voice?
Yeah, that's correct. The composer's voice. So the biggest challenge is also kind of its biggest success point, if you will, or I guess greatest strength is that it's a different team each time. And so this is a festival of now. It is a 2025 festival. Our team started in 2023. But the first festival, their challenges were that it was a first festival and it was a massive scope. The second festival faced a pandemic and it was right after a pandemic. So hopefully people would come out. And so they had to have a very large virtual component for this festival. Again, large in scope, but we wanted to include a large vocal component. So the composer's voice, it's kind of a double meaning there because it's the, artistic voice of the composer, but it's also a chance to include so much vocal music in Chicago that does tend to also have a lot of contemporary composers involved. And being that it's a different team each time, we get to kind of reflect on what our audience is interested in now. It's a different audience for what they're facing now versus what they were coming out of the pandemic. So I think that what we see is the older festival model of having, like an 8 hour day of performances was something that audiences were less interested in this time. So that's one of the reasons it's so spread out over a month.
Now, what I find interesting is I read the mission statement on your website, and it says in part that it's about intentionally amplifying and celebrating the contributions of underrepresented creators. And that was preceded by something that talked about how traditionally, there were artists who were overlooked and composers because it favored primarily, white, Eurocentric male narratives. In a time when DEI initiatives are being jettisoned, do you feel the
Hmm.
existence of that mission for Air Taxi Festival is a response to the prevailing winds in America today?
That's interesting. So our team, as I mentioned, we started in 2023. So that mission statement is coming from, I mean, it's an amalgamation of the 2016 perspective, the 2021 perspective. So it was happening long before we saw this kind of gutting of, funding for the NEA and some of those different events that have occurred. So it's not exactly a response to, because that was all written long before that. I think it's telling of the times, though, and it's, I think, not our intention any means to attack Eurocentric music. We all love that. This is really just, we want to provide an additional space that is able to amplify all sorts of different voices. Congruent with that is a Chicago festival is often lacking representation from folks who live perhaps in Aurora, Illinois, one of the suburbs. It's only about 2 hours away. The suburbs of Chicago is very expansive. And so there's plenty of musicians in Illinois that don't tend to be part of a lot of these types of things because they're not in Chicago proper. The Composer Showcase, for example, has 22 commissions, the largest commissioning initiative in Illinois history. And that's Illinois composers. We have folks from Western Illinois, Southern Illinois, and that was really important in terms of representation to make sure that Illinois is actually really represented in the Composer Showcase.
Well, that also broadens the number of people you can go out to as well, doesn't it?
Sure, yeah. And the perspectives. I think it's important, we really wanted to have a lot of different voices involved in the festival. It is the composer's voice. With the Taxi Concert Series, which is our chamber music series, it's really focused on the performer. So the performers were the folks who were like, I want to put on this program, whether it included voice or not. We were just looking at what programs would be interesting and fitting in the festival. The Composer Showcase is more about the composers. So wanting to provide those opportunities for both types of voices.
So, how would you describe the state of contemporary classical music, perhaps in Illinois in general, and then specifically in Chicago?
Oh, sure. Well, I think we have an absolutely robust scene. It's very impressive. If you look at our Accent series, for example, that's happening from October 19th through November 2nd. And these are folks who wanted to put on their own programming, have their own ticketing. They maybe are part of a university set of performances. There's a lot going on in 2 weeks' time. And so I think you can see the amount of music that's coming out of Chicago is impressive. I was asked recently, how come there are so many concerts? And, how come there are 700 plus musicians involved? And I think the answer is because there are that many people who want to be involved. So I'd say the state of contemporary music in Chicago is very robust because we have such a strong arts scene here. I think the state of funding and audiences for all kind of art forms is changing, but I don't think that necessarily means it's diminishing. I think it's changing. And I think that our goal in this festival, and again, like starting this from 2023, was to provide a breadth of space for audiences and performers to be involved. And it's a huge risk. This is a massive risk. We could be putting on these very interesting performances. It is completely up to the audience to come out whether or not. So that's the beauty of putting on a festival like this is taking risks doesn't break the bank for us because we only happen every 4 years. So the purpose of this is to, be a place that's leading in contemporary music, which Chicago has been for so long.
But you wouldn't be on your third festival if there wasn't an audience coming out for it either, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great thing. We have so many large institutions that, the lyric operas, the Chicago symphony orchestras of the world that are right here that kind of have maintained this long history. But then we also have these other organizations. Apollo Chorus is one of the longest serving classical music organizations in the country right here in Chicago. So there's a lot of organizations that have kept Chicago at the limelight, which helps Ear Taxi Festival kind of continue to grow. And what will the 2029, we assume it'll be 2029 festival look like? Hopefully completely different, because hopefully the nature of the world is a little different too. So whatever that team chooses is the need of the focus will reflect what does Chicago's scene look like at that time.
Well, brings up an interesting concept for me, Tim. I mean, how much was your team's focus predicated on the success or the response to the previous Ear Taxi Festival?
That's a great question. I think we saw the real success of all of the chamber music performances from 2021. All sorts of organizations, whether it's a duet or a large vocal ensemble, really interested in presenting their kind of program, and we wanted to do that. So that was something that we really carried on. In 2016, you had some of these larger format concerts, and just because of the pandemic, that wasn't really as doable. So those are two of those things that we've merged into this time. I think the unique addition to this festival would be that composer showcase, where we have seen with other festivals the commissioning, or maybe it'll be 2 or 3 artists are commissioned for the festival, and we wanted to kind of turn that on its side for more people to be involved. I think it's great to see the kind of amalgamation of the previous festivals within this one.
Now, if we go back to the first festival in 2016, there were composers such as Samuel Adams and Mason Bates, Anthony Chung, Ted Hearn, all of whom have gone on to major careers in the last 9 years, with Mason Bates having just had his opera, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, open
Oh,
the Met Opera season this year. What is the goal of Ear Taxi Festival to be a platform to elevate composers to larger profiles?
yeah, well, I think that totally speaks to the point of making sure that there's space for all sorts of different voices to be involved, because this is a great thing to put on an artist's resume, a great jumping off point. In 2021, Tamika Reed was involved. She went on to get some major awards after that. So I think we do see that this being involved in this festival draws attention from other arts organizations. And it's great because we can take those risks, quote unquote, on putting on these programs and seeing artists that we think are going to say something unique at the festival. So the fact that there are 700 different artists involved, I think, speaks to the plethora of ideas, and not just talented individuals, but all sorts of different, voices that they each bring. So I am confident that as you see the 1 month from now, the end of this festival, some of these artists, maybe announcing album releases or what their next projects are that may be larger than one of the, performances that they're involved in. If you're commissioning 22 Illinois composers, they're all doing other things as well. So I think things that I can't highlight right now, but there will be fun things that are highlighted by each of these composers after the series.
So what is the awareness? What is the interest by the large organizations here in Chicago, whether it's Chicago Symphony Orchestra or it's Ravinia? You know, what is how involved do they get at least in witnessing what's going on so that they can have their, fingers on the pulse of what's coming forward?
Yeah, what's interesting about this festival is with New Music Chicago. So this is a program of the nonprofit New Music Chicago. And one of the goals early on was to try and find other arts nonprofit organizations to partner. We didn't want to create a new orchestra. We didn't want to create a new opera company. We wanted to just take the organizations that are already existing and pair them together. So there's all sorts of cases where we see that, where, whether it's The Lost Birds by Christopher Tin being performed by William Ferris Chorale plus DePaul University's 20 plus ensemble. October 18th, we have Chicago Philharmonic with Apollo Chorus. So again, instead of, creating one or the other, we're just finding these organizations and putting them together. Chicago Philharmonic has been very involved from the get-go at trying to find a way to put on this massive scope, because that concert in particular has around 200 musicians on stage. So it takes a lot of partners to make sure that works. And with the other organizations, we've had a great relationship with the Lyric Opera, who's been promoting some of our upcoming operas. Chicago Fringe Opera is the company that's going to be presenting those at the K. Ryan Center. Chicago Symphony Orchestra, we don't know what's going on with music now, but they were very supportive of kind of pushing our contemporary music agenda, if you will, because they see that New Music Chicago are the boots on the ground. It's a membership organization that has artists, performers and composers involved. So it makes sense for us to do something like Ear Taxi Festival. And then all sorts of other organizations as well, from the venues, the Harris Theater being involved to help make sure that we could put on a concert like this. So it's been very robust in terms of the standard, the large arts organizations supporting. Ravinia Staines Institute is involved in the Composer Showcase. So I think it's, if the scope of the festival isn't remarkable, it's remarkable to see all of these different partners coming to the same space, because I don't think you've seen that before, where these different massive organizations who typically work on their own in their own silo are partnering and working together.
So how do you measure the success of a given festival?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think it's in ticket sales, because this is about risk taking. I don't think that we were, originally thinking that whatever great piece by whatever great composer, it depended upon who was in the audience that day. I think it's about taking the risks, putting forward that there is great music in Chicago by living artists, and that it's there for audiences to see. I think that was what was seen in previous festivals from 2016 and 2021. We've already talked about the success of different artists who've come from that. Nobody talks about how many butts were in the seats at these shows. Now, we hope that all of these shows are absolutely full, but we're really excited to just be able to present to the world that there are a lot of different things going on within the Chicago community. So I would argue that it's a success just because it happens. And then I hope that in the future iterations, they take on that similar perspective that sometimes it's about presenting art and it's not about fighting over, the minutia of things. It's the fact that we're actually doing it in a time that, as you mentioned, looks a little different than it did maybe 4 or 8 years ago.
So, how do you adjudicate which projects are the right fit for a given theme? And in doing so, do you and the team have any sense like, wow, wait until people see this, this could be a breakthrough moment?
Mhm. Certainly. There's so depending on the series, there were different partners involved of I wouldn't call them adjudicators, but yeah, the folks who were kind of having these discussions. What would work? We're all tied to a budget. We have a very tiny budget to put this on with a very small team. So I think the sad thing is we didn't have more money to do more things. But for example, the anchor performances, those large scale operas, things like that. A lot of it was the talk of what's hitting right now, what speaks to our kind of artist voices. So we have Larab K. Raphael, the artistic director, Amy Wirtz, who's the curatorial director. She's also previously been the board president for New Music Chicago. So our team really looked at what does the landscape of Chicago look like? What could be a little bit different? What's happened in the past? What do we want to do differently than 2016 or 2021? And those were kind of the guiding lights. And then members of, we had kind of an artistic advisory committee. So those who were involved in different organizations within the community, board members of New Music Chicago. So all of these different voices kind of chimed in on what they thought would be an interesting festival. Because I think that was another thing. We didn't want to present what's already been seen. What's the point of doing the same episode of a same television show? We don't want to be a cover band. We want to present something new and exciting.
Which is, of course, the antithesis of what major institutions do because they have to satisfy subscriber needs.
It is certainly a different model. I've run professional orchestral organizations before, and yeah, you have a lot of demand to make sure that you're able to pay off a concert. And in this, the risk is that we're paying off the concert, but we don't need to worry about, are the ticket sales going to supplement, are we doing our nutcracker to supplement something else? We don't have to worry about that because the goal was really to fundraise what we could to make sure that we can just present what needs to be presented. That being said, there's certainly money that we would love to find, support that we would love to have to continue to grow this so that this does happen again. But I think for the aspect of what today looks like with the organization, it's nice. We can take those chances that some of the other organizations are not.
So if this year's Ear Taxi Festival is, by your website's definition, the largest single commissioning initiative in Illinois history, how do you go about raising the money to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We had some great partners early on. I have to shout out the Treehouse Foundation because they were very excited about this coming back. They were really excited about seeing us doing different things, different from previous festivals, different from what other organizations are doing. Again, our pitch on all of this was in 2023, so that was a different world back then. But the fundraising model is a lot of foundational support, a lot of support from organizations that are new to Ear Taxi Festival. So one of the hardest parts of building this festival, in that it's every 4 years or so, is that we didn't really have a team in between that time period fundraising. So this was all, from $0 we started and we raised from there. So it was certainly a task to be done for that. And I think we saw a large change in who is supporting the arts. Several foundations in Chicago have sunset or are no longer supporting the arts. The NEA used to support Ear Taxi Festival. They do not support the Ear Taxi Festival this time around. I think, with all fundraising, you get more no's than you get yeses. But there were still, even with that climate of those organizations that were not interested in funding something that looks different with different voices, there are those who will. And I think that's the great hope of what contemporary music, what arts organization funding looks like, is there are still folks that want to see this happen. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we're delivering that to audiences so that they can get involved. I think we have this climate where folks or corporations, I should say, are less trained on giving to local organizations in the cultural sector, because we have so much need with food sourcing, with social justice, with healthcare, all very important things, and the arts are just as important. And it's just something that we have to train the next generation of corporate leaders on the importance of the cultural sector.
I'm lucky because I spent most of my life, well, all of my life in Los Angeles and with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, particularly under Esa-Pekka Salonen and then Gustavo Dudamel. New music was a regular part of
Yeah.
what we were exposed to as an audience in Los Angeles, which is not the same thing everywhere. But in talking to composers and doing interviews, you know, I find that the biggest challenge oftentimes is not getting the commission. It's getting second, third, and fourth performances of a new work
Mm.
after the premiere. Since you are also a composer yourself, in addition to being, the director of this Ear Taxi Festival this season, what are the challenges composers face, or the composers who are in this festival are going to face with finding other venues and outlets for them to have this music heard?
That's absolutely true. It's an interesting thing as a composer. Often, you write a piece for maybe your friend's group that's bassoon, clarinet, and vibraphone. There may not be several of those organizations around. I think that's one of the life things of a composer is you have pieces that may not fit everyone, and that's okay. It's still important art in what it is. Some things are more replicable. A string quartet, for example, there are several string quartets. So I think for composers today, there's certainly the business aspect of being a composer that composers have to always keep in mind. Same thing with a film score. You probably, if you're a young film composer, you probably can't afford a John Williams size orchestra. So you have to find a way to get the sound that's necessary with what's available. With these commissions, the goal with them was, these composers were paired with an ensemble and then a voice. And that voice kind of depended on what was available, whether it was soprano, baritone, tenor, whatever. But these ensembles, whether they were wind quintet, string quartet, just piano and voice, they're relatively common groupings of instruments. So I think they're certainly more replicable performances for those types of works. But I think that with some of the larger performances, some of these things are less. So like this is the Midwest premiere of an African American Requiem. It has a lot of percussion parts. Percussion is very difficult to fund in an orchestra because you have so many different instruments that you have to source and rent and all that stuff. So it certainly has complications, but I think with a lot of the music that we were picking for this festival, we kind of wanted to take the chance whether or not it was the type of thing that was easily replicable or not, which also kind of leads to the world premieres. For example, Stacey Garrett's Piano Concerto. Of course, it's a piano concerto. Those are very common, but being able to make space for those types of performances. I don't know yet if she has future performances lined up for something like that. But I think a lot of these artists were already getting talks like, how can I promote my upcoming concert after my Ear Taxi Festival concert? Because perhaps they do have a repeat of that same program that they plan to do in, say, January or something like that. So hopefully within the marketing of the festival, we'll still be able to give that kind of support so that they can promote whatever their next performance is.
Well, I saw on your own Instagram account from about, I guess it would be early summer last year, that you were bemoaning the fact that you were 0 for 23 in concert performance applications.
Yes.
You've expressed yourself through your music. What is the process of getting yourself psyched up to submit for number 24 or number 25?
Yeah, so I've been composing for a long time. And so I decided, it was probably 2013 or 14, I was so curious about all of these composer contests, composer calls that I would be involved in. And I was like, how much time am I spending on this versus what is the outcome? And so I started tracking each year. And with anything like this, the more things you push out, the more yeses you get. But you're absolutely right. There was a year where it was 0 for 23. And that's not to say it wasn't a successful year, but it is the type of thing that I think shows that personal relationships and network building within an arts community is much more successful than blind calls. And that's not to say those things aren't great. Earshot, reading series from the ACO, there's all sorts of orchestras that do score calls. Those are all great. And I think they're trying to find a way to find composers But for composers, the large amount of, I think, success comes from network building, getting to know those ensembles, going to support other artists. I'm very involved with the Society for Composers and Lyricists, which is the guild. We don't have a union for film and video game composers, so it's more of a guild. And a big thing we're always saying, as I steal this quote from composer Catherine Joy, is composers supporting composers. You know, we don't have to see the world as we're all competing for the same job. If somebody else gets that job, we should try and celebrate that, even though it always hurts to lose the opportunity. But I think, similar to other things, the zero-sum game mentality in arts, that we have to compete, and if somebody wins something, I lose something, isn't great for the scene. I think there's so much more strength in celebrating the art of what we're all doing. And I think that goes both ways. You know, if someone gets an opportunity, I celebrate them, and vice versa when it comes back around. So it's certainly hard to do as an artist because there are so many of us looking for opportunities. I mentioned that Ear Taxi Festival was trying to do what we could with the balance budget we have to provide as many opportunities as possible. But of course, for all composers, I mean, it is hard to find those opportunities and get your foot in the door. Absolutely.
And then it all depends on what the relationship is with the commissioning, orchestra or institution is. I mean, you have a new commission from the Danville Symphony Orchestra that's having a premiere next year. What is the emotional arc that you or probably other composers go through between being considered for a commission and then finally being granted that commission?
Oh, it's certainly a roller coaster. And even when, something like, I'll talk about that, but even something smaller where it's just, a vocalist who wants, to set this poem to music and they've got a pianist in mind, and it's a very small, maybe it's going to be performed at a university. Even that's a roller coaster of, the excitement that it's going to happen. Then there's always the daunting blank page, which I always say that the blank page to me isn't the worst part. It's bar 32. It's like, okay, so now that I've run out of ideas, what do I do? So with the Danville Symphony, this is an interesting commission because it's in celebration of Vermilion County, where Danville is located, of their 200th anniversary. So there's plenty of space for ideas because there's a long history and even history before the town was founded. So with this, it's been an interesting journey of research. So, you kind of get dulled down by like learning history, but then you get excited about an idea. And so it's certainly an up and a down. And then the arduous process of putting together parts and scores, which every composer knows what I mean. It's just making sure your page turns and all of the notes look perfect is a long and arduous process. And so at that point, I feel like I'm like, well, oh gosh, I wish I could hire somebody else to do the engraving part of this. And then you get to the performance and it's, an enlightening experience. It's so wonderful to see an audience's reaction, to kind of get to hand it off. And then there's the kind of post-show blues that you get. Like, oh, show's done. What now? And then you try and find that second performance. So I'd say, for every composer, all of these commissions are such a wild ride. And each one is, they're all very similar, but they're certainly unique. I think with Danville, this is an opportunity where I wanted to write, lean on kind of the American symphonist style, from David Diamond, Howard Hanson, Aaron Copland. I wanted to, this is a more of Americana piece. So I'm not going in the more experimental range that I would with some other pieces. And I like a box. I like knowing that, we're gonna try and aim for this target, and then I can break down whatever walls I can. That kind of gets me the energy to go through all of these ups and downs that is the commissioning process.
Yes, and then some commissioning partners are very hands-on, and others are not. And I assume that.
Yeah, and I think that's really similar with film. So in my work with film, you're composing music that is for the director's vision. It is not for my vision. There is a script, there is a vision, and so our purpose as film composers is really to, be the sub character there to help tell a story. And there's a lot of collaboration that happens there. Whether they're thinking, this sounds a little bit too happy, I think it should be darker. You have to take that into account because you are in service to the story. It's not absolute music, as it were. It's very programmatic. So having done a lot of that work, I think it's changed my perspective in, when commissioning council says, we really want to highlight this county, Vermilion County. We really want to talk about these things. For example, Abraham Lincoln served as a lawyer in Danville. And so that's something that they're very proud of and something that they're really interested in highlighting. So whether or not I was interested in that, I do kind of want to respect that this is where what their heart kind of desires within the music. Of course, there's overreach sometimes with those collaborators, but you always have to find the best way. I would hope to find the middle ground between what folks want. I think life is very short, so you don't want to get bogged down on picking those fights over things like what is it all worth. And I think a lot of that is outlining the scope of work early on. What are our goals for this? Why are we doing this at all? We could all spend our money and time elsewhere. What really is the goal of doing this? Something I've asked before is this a piece that's worth writing? Like, am I the right person for this, or is composer B the right person? That was something a composer mentor of mine said. Maybe you're not the right person for the job sometimes, and you have to be okay with that, letting go and doing what it is what is your voice? What is your kind of goal within your artistic life? And not trying to take away jobs from other people. Just try to be your own artistic voice.
And no pressure bringing Lincoln in on this committee, given what Aaron Copland did with Lincoln Portrait and what John Williams did with the score to the Spielberg film. So,
oh yeah, I've listened to both of them. I'm excited. So I guess his desk is in Danville, and you can go sit behind his desk, which will be fun. I'm actually headed there tomorrow to Danville to go meet with the town. Certainly, an interesting figure to study in today's day. Certainly a hopeful character. I mean, America's greatest president. It's been enlightening to kind of look into his time there, and how do I highlight that in a way that's not stealing too much from Copland, but we all want to steal a little bit from Copland because he's so great.
Well, you can always put counterpoint in that sort of serves as commentary for where we are today versus who Lincoln was then.
Yeah. And what he faced in his time in office in terms of division. This is a piece coming from an urban living composer for a rural community, and I hope that we find a common ground in what is the artistic experience that we're all looking for. It's great that we can all kind of rally around somebody like Lincoln and say, like, look at something, like, here's a great figure that we can all rally around, of somebody who brought people together and faced a very difficult situation.
Right. One other thing I want to ask you about, Tim. 2021, I did an interview with Jessie Montgomery, who is on Ear Taxi Festival's advisory committee. And she told me, I think creating art or composing is a form of expression and a form of freedom. Just being a human being and having the right and freedom to create what you want, that's a natural human right and ability we all possess and develop in different ways. What do you think, or what would you like Ear Taxi Festival's legacy to be in terms of creating a safe space for artists to have the opportunity to act on that exact freedom that Jessie referenced?
Oh yeah, I think that's so great because, I mean, for so many reasons, but yeah, absolutely. Like, it is your right to, have those, artistic ideas, and whether you want to record those with electronics or you want to notate them classically, like, it's your right to do whatever it is that you want to do with that. And I think it's great that Ear Taxi Festival is providing a space for both of those, and also the experimenting of that. The Pleiades Jam, it's part of our professional development. I hope that there are too many artists arriving that we can't even fit everybody in the venue, which is the brand new Checkout in Uptown, a space for artists to just come together and experiment together, to live that exact statement. So I hope that is absolutely a legacy of ETF 25. Beyond whatever we were able to do with our budget, that folks came out, were inspired by those composers, and also participated in conversation with them, learning and talking about whatever it is that they're doing and coming up with next.
It's pretty rich with opportunities.
We hope that there is something for everyone. That was another goal. Whether you like vocal music, there's plenty of non-vocal music on the festival as well. So there's experimental, there's some more traditional sounding music. We really hope that there's something for everyone to just experience living art, art by people who are alive right now.